Even though we say that this does not mean nuclear weapons under Danish law, won't it still make Denmark more vulnerable to attacks simply by being part of such a strategic partnership?
I would like to say something about this. The Defense Intelligence Service assesses this, evaluates the Defense Intelligence Service. The decision to initiate such collaboration does not increase the threat of Russian military allegations against coming. It is important to emphasize, and I understand well that one can be concerned about the world we live in, but I also think one can say this decision or the subsequent political and diplomatic reactions, including criticism of Denmark from Russia, needs to be assessed. It is also very likely that Russia, publicly and in a diplomatic context, will criticize Denmark and threaten Denmark with military technical measures, including mention of Russian nuclear weapons, although not likely stationed in Denmark. Here we're not saying it explicitly, but there may be potential nuclear threats directed towards Denmark. So, of course, it's important to address the situation we're in, especially considering the current state of affairs.
Just a few days back, it was mentioned that one could think about a trip to Denmark, so why doesn't he make the move?
The decision we have made in the government, with support also from Parliament, is a historic decision regarding moving forward on these two fronts, both in terms of exploring whether we can proceed on behalf of the nation. It is, of course, about continuing to analyze this, but also about accepting the invitation that has been presented and considering what it might mean in the long term. That is something to assess, and it is not really a question that I concern myself with. I focus on the decision that has been made. We will have plenty of chances to talk about what it could mean later.
Daniel Frederiksen, so now I say this here, not nuclear weapons in Danish. So what is it he promised to produce? But when we hear, when he comes today, like with my father, limiting, then he says he's going to decide about unrest. Peter, USA, what is it? What is Denmark? What has anything to do with France?
When you say strategic cooperation, well, that sounds really nice. Can't we get a bit more clarity on what it actually entails?
What we do with this cooperation is that we integrate even more deeply into European deterrence from Denmark's side, and we do this alone. We can evaluate that this is what is necessary to secure Denmark and Europe. We are strengthening our own defense, we are strengthening NATO's collective defense, but deterrence is at least equally important, which is also why we have made decisions regarding a range of advanced weapons. It's an essential part of deterrence.
And we do. Of course, we have thought this through thoroughly. It is our government's assessment that France, as one of the very few European countries, possesses this deterrent capability. Now, we can say it is expanding.
Its perspective on this to a greater extent, let's recognize some of the historical discourse around this suggests that it should now be more seen as a European matter. It is positive from a Danish, Nordic, and European perspective. So, what are we engaging in? We are stepping into an even closer collaboration with France, but also with several other European governments, including ours. Our neighboring countries, our brethren in Sweden and several other European nations. This could, for instance, involve training activities, joint exercises, and in this context, Danish defense will also be able to participate in some work already being done by France today, which they aim to expand, possibly.
Well, it's a job that's just beginning, so there will obviously also need to be discussions happening down there. It will become more concrete, but there are a range of initiatives that can be set in motion, including training activities. There are also updates regarding closed fields, aerial surveillance, to mention a few elements. It's a variety of aspects, giving us a clearer insight into what reflects Nepal. That said, we've also asked the commander to conduct investigations, doing more than conventionally with NATO, because we also have the opportunity to delve deeper into the discussion about how we can engage the game within NATO. Now, deterrence, this is an important point to emphasize. It's operating on two fronts. Today, we can't roll out a concrete plan detailing every specific aspect yet, but ultimately, the Danish defense gains a better understanding of clear deterrence, if one might say so.
It's also just about taking a moment to focus on one thing.
It is also about participating at the table because, like it or not, there can be various opinions on it. Having more deterrence like NATO and Europe is crucial in this regard. We've gone through this for many years, and it's becoming even more important with the behavior we see from Russia and the significance of having a seat at that table as a nation.
Increased access to information and strategic preparations is critical. It's just quite tough, and well, when you hear what we've promised France, you could ask the fulfilling question of what France has in turn promised us. And what's interesting for us here is that the French nuclear weapons are, of course, French. They belong to the president and are intended to serve France's national security considerations. And it's of great interest to us that France is thinking beyond its own borders and towards England and Europe as this strengthens our security. That's essentially what we're getting, and it gives us insight into their thinking. And then there are the specific elements which the defense minister has also noted individually. But the main point is that the French nuclear weapons, from being a very strictly French matter, are now included in a broader European context regarding France's security interests.
Well, I'm absolutely sure about what this is about. I understand how these exercises lead up to this point, but I really need to ask. I've done interviews and spoken with all three of you about many other important topics, and it's crucial to handle this in a purposeful way. This is exactly what inspires us all. What has changed now that it's no longer meant to serve as a clear deterrent and action?
So it should be something we do collectively across 8 nations and achieve. What is it that makes this necessary? Within NATO, of which Denmark is a member, it's bound to be immensely thrilling.
But we are also placing our actions or our eggs in that basket. NATO's nuclear deterrence is absolutely crucial for security both in Europe, across the Atlantic, the USA and Canada, and that work continues. In fact, today we have expressed that we want to engage even more to integrate further so that the whole NATO collaboration remains strong. We have always known that within NATO there are 3 countries. They hold the necessary deterrence when it comes to nuclear capability, the USA, the United Kingdom and France. And what has now been added, as Lars also pointed out, is that the French have shifted from viewing their weapons as a primarily French matter. And it's completely correct that it is a sovereign weapon for France, but they are now shaping it into a European dimension, which we believe aligns well with the rearmament we are generally seeing on the European continent. We are, after all, undergoing historic rearmament, not just in Denmark, but in Europe. This should not be viewed as contradictory to NATO, but rather as a strengthening of the European pillar, which we see from both a Danish and a European perspective as decisive.
It's something about how we don't trust as much, not to do with trusting so much in the USA as we might use it. There was a president and a bit of history.
Where I ended up mentioning it was during 2020, a long time ago, while assisting the president under pressing conditions. And it looks at the tendencies that have been ongoing for a long time, regardless of who occupies the White House, that there should be a long-term burden sharing across the Atlantic, meaning Europe must now do more on its own, and yes, we trust the American umbrella, and we're here. It's a combination.
But I would also just like to briefly mention that it's not something we only sing about in relation to politics. The Chief has been involved in providing an assessment and recommendation regarding what military professional advice entails and continues, clearly saying that all this is in Denmark's interest, to do both, to return home and to engage with NATO. We have now tasked our experts in technology with this. There is much more we can do to become more active players in NATO as a clear deterrent. If we want to, we must address this later. But then our soul also says if there's a chance to create this, a societal effort with banks, then it benefits Denmark as well. Because in this way we gain much greater security.
And lots of world wars, you might think mostly about yourself in reality. You're saying this about strategic exercises. Should our F-35s be equipped with nuclear missiles? Or should we in some way be able to train or launch nuclear bombs with Danish material?
Now, currently, it's kind of like wrestling with an escalation where we can't use systems we have to deal with,
And what the French have, well, we currently don't have the capacities to enter into a French nuclear weapons readiness, so to speak. That said, if more is to be done from a Danish perspective, it's not that we have those 35 capacities, but it's something we must explore, whether we want to provide the aircraft in relation to NATO's deterrence. There are today a number of countries
that both act as requesting nations but also provide capacity. That means making aircraft available, but our Danish F-35 aircraft will be capable, if it becomes relevant at some point, of being configured for or fulfilling such a role.
And then there are just some more general questions about whether all three concerns relate to the French opposition. I have made it very clear that they have no desire to act as Europe's guardian angels, and Marine Le Pen has directly used those words. The same has been said by Bardella, who, as you know, is up for election in France next year. The opposition is doing well in the polls, and aren't we at risk of simply ending up with yet another nationalist leader in the bank who declares France first, and perhaps more?
Is he repeating what Donald Trump said? Regarding American nuclear arms,
I think it is difficult for us to assess how French security policy will look in the future. Of course, our great hope is that France will remain a strong supporter of both NATO and European integration, including the agreements that have been made over the past few days. However, we have no reason to believe otherwise than that this collaboration will continue even beyond the current challenges.
Well, I actually think I'll start by following up on the question that arises here about Greenland as a whole. The crisis has shown through the USA that allies don't necessarily need to remain so forever. It raises the question whether in 5, 10 or 15 years a French president will still want a nuclear agreement.
Well, with the risk of repeating myself, we simply cannot predict what will happen in France. I hope that everyone in Europe, including Denmark as well as other European countries, understands the grave situation Europe is facing. There is only one way forward, and that is to integrate more, cooperate more, and work even more closely together. This will be the message that we as a government bring into all discussions with other countries on this matter. Yes, I think we have nothing else to add.
And I'd just like to ask about something. Over the past few weeks, you've given various interviews, spoken about this in Parliament, and repeatedly emphasized that if there's going to be nuclear armament in Europe, it must happen within NATO's framework. Now, I understand things can occur in parallel and so on, but the fact is that this isn't happening within NATO's framework. So what exactly has changed since you made those statements a few weeks ago?
It's not accurate to state that nothing is occurring in terms of NATO deterrence. Unfortunately, I am unable to provide more details today due to confidentiality. However, when I've expressed myself as I have, it's because I think additional measures are necessary, and I consider it prudent to accept the fund's invitation while also examining the possibility of taking further actions. Solidarity in terms of NATO deterrence makes good sense, as something concrete has come out of it at the same time.
Yes, older people are taking departure properly. Now we will deal with it. So here's just a quote in the program where you say, if one begins to break NATO cooperation from the inside with all sorts of initiatives, what kind of signal does that send? Does it communicate a situation where one actually wants enhanced cooperation? Isn't that exactly some of the things being addressed now with various initiatives?
I don't think so, but first and foremost, it is a broad coalition of countries that have now accepted the invitation for closer strategic cooperation with the bank. Furthermore, we have clearly signalled that we are also keen to do more in strengthening our new transparent cooperation within the framework of NATO. We can do much more at night as well without implementing Danish nuclear weapons policy, which applies at the current moment. So this is not a question of membership, and it involves both young people. I am pleased that this is a decision that will therefore stand on two legs, and therefore the decision to now analyse if we can do more in NATO as well.
The Prime Minister is referring to the military super league as a premise, but is there an automatic head toward Russia, or what exactly will it achieve? This delves into this area of interest.
There is indeed a nuclear threat, understood in the sense that the Russians have nuclear weapons, and therefore it is necessary to have some more nuclear deterrence from NATO's side. We have that today, and now there is such a declaration to make it even stronger from a European perspective. It's not that, as the French president said earlier today, when we say that there is an imminent nuclear threat from Russia, but they have them, and therefore it is also necessary for them to have the necessary measures.
On the second side,
Currently, from the Jyllands-Posten producer's perspective, I noted that there's a possibility of Russian nuclear weapons being increasingly targeted toward Denmark because of this decision. Could you provide more details about what this entails? It's understandable that numerous individuals might feel worried hearing about this matter, including the instructors.
I allowed myself to share the FPS assessment, but what I initially said is that this is not an increased threat of military attack. However, it is very, very crucial to emphasize that. But then we might see both diplomatic and political signals from Russia. And I just think we must say we are living in a completely different reality now than we were just a few years ago, where Russia's actions have precisely become part of the fear campaign by exploiting various opportunities. Excellence, and we should remember it as we might also encounter it.
The functioning of these deterrence mechanisms is based on the fear that superpowers have. If they were to bomb a nuclear power, they risk facing a retaliatory strike. Does this agreement suggest that France might retaliate with nuclear weapons if Russia were to use them as well?
It has been expressed from the French side that there is a desire to create a stronger European dimension for what were originally French nuclear weapons. This is to be achieved in close collaboration with NATO, and also in close cooperation with both Americans and the British, who also possess such weapons. Clearly, choosing to adopt a broader European perspective based on military assessment from our defense chief is believed to strengthen Denmark's security and European security.
Yes, you said it to Mette Frederiksen, saying there's only one way forward: integration. Denmark can maintain an unchanged stance on nuclear weapons because we're talking about cooperation here. This makes it even more important for us. We truly want to be close to the French, and I imagine these are the kinds of discussions we're having at our significant cooperation meetings, ensuring steady progress moving forward.
Well, two things when I said what I said earlier about integration. It was about anger and European unity. It was in response to what might happen after a presidential election. And as the Danish government, we are of the very clear conviction that the only way we can ensure the safety of the Danish people is by having very, very close cooperation with the rest of Europe. This is also why we have abolished the defense reservations previously in place. And with all due modesty, everyone has been able to follow the importance of having close European cooperation. When we were threatened externally regarding the Kingdom and the Greenland situation, the comment about increasingly closer integration was broader. There's nothing in this decision that changes Danish nuclear policy. That's important to point out. Therefore, one could discuss many things broadly, but what we have chosen to do is to enter into cooperation with France and several other European countries. It's a strategic cooperation concerning French deterrence, and thereby we have not ventured into other discussions or decisions.
Okay, so you want to confirm that it's going through? It's a step on the way, then we have to discuss the long term, whether we should abolish what's been mentioned now and ask about Leo, and then we can abolish the reservation, and we could also abolish nuclear weapons in Denmark's large relations, but it's not a step.
No, that's not how one can see it. I mean, you can see it exactly as what we've dealt with today, where there are no discussions of a European context of a second character beyond what we've explained today. That's just what we achieved today. Actually, not more.